Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. My name doesn't matter as much as my story does. What matters is that I was 61 years old, standing in a ballroom full of people who had known me for decades, wearing the emerald dress my husband had picked out for me the previous Christmas, and I was about to do something I had rehearsed in my head every single night for 3 months. But let me go back to the beginning, because the ending only means something if you understand where I started. I met my husband when I was 22 years old in the waiting room of a dentist's office in Richmond, Virginia. I had a toothache. He had a cracked molar. We both reached for the same tattered copy of a magazine at the same moment, and he laughed, and I laughed, and by the time the hygienist called my name 40 minutes later, I had already given him my phone number on the back of a receipt I found in my purse. We were married 11 months after that. We built a life together in the same city where we met, in a house with a big oak tree in the backyard that our daughter used to climb until she was 14 and decided she was too old for that sort of thing. 38 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 38 years of holidays and arguments and grocery lists and Sunday mornings. 38 years of knowing which side of the bed belonged to whom, of finishing each other's sentences, of having a shorthand that no one else could follow. I knew how he took his coffee. I knew he always checked the locks twice before sleeping. I knew he hummed old Motown songs when he was concentrating on something difficult. I knew him the way you only know a person after decades of quiet, ordinary, faithful attention. He was a cardiologist, a good one, the kind that other doctors referred their own family members to, which always struck me as the highest possible compliment in that profession. He had been at the same hospital for over 30 years, had his name on a research wing after a significant donation he'd pushed hard to secure, had been named Physician of the Year 3 times by the Richmond Medical Foundation. He was respected. He was admired. He was the kind of man that people pointed to in a room and said, quietly, "There's a good man." I believed that. I believed it completely and without question, the way you believe in things that have never given you reason to doubt them. I should tell you what I did, because I think it matters. I had been a high school art teacher for 22 years before I took early retirement when my mother's health declined. After she passed, I started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, running art therapy sessions for kids in the oncology ward. I painted in my studio in the afternoons. I had a garden that took up most of my weekends from March through October. My life was quiet and full and exactly what I had chosen. My husband and I were not a troubled marriage. I want to be clear about that, because I think people assume there must have been signs everywhere, cracks in the foundation, years of distance. There weren't. Or if there were, they were hidden from me so completely that I never once felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The first sign, the one I almost didn't notice, came on a Tuesday evening in January. He had come home later than usual, which wasn't remarkable. Cardiologists keep long hours. He had gone straight upstairs to shower before dinner, which also wasn't remarkable. What was slightly unusual was that he had left his suit jacket draped over the dining room chair, instead of hanging it in the closet the way he always did. He had a mild thing about clothing being put away properly. It was a small habit I had teased him about for decades. I picked up the jacket to hang it for him. Something fell out of the inside pocket. I assumed it was a pen or his hospital badge lanyard. I looked down. It was a receipt. From a hotel I recognized by name, a nice one, not far from the hospital, the kind of place used for medical conferences and business stays. The date on the receipt was a Saturday, 3 weeks earlier. A Saturday I clearly remembered because I had spent it driving my daughter and my 2 grandchildren to a birthday party in Charlottesville. My husband had said he was spending that Saturday at the hospital, catching up on patient files and reviewing research data with a colleague. Room rate, 1 night. Checkout Sunday morning. I held the receipt and I stood very still in my own dining room, and I did not breathe properly for what felt like a long time. I put the jacket away. I put the receipt in the pocket of my cardigan. I went to the kitchen and I finished cooking dinner. When he came downstairs, I smiled and asked him about his day, and he told me about a patient who was recovering well from a procedure, and I listened, and I nodded, and I felt like I was watching myself from very far away. I did not confront him that night. I don't entirely know why. Some part of me understood, even then, that a single hotel receipt could have an innocent explanation, a surprise. A mistake on the date, something I wasn't aware of. I told myself I needed more than a piece of paper before I said something that could not be unsaid. What I actually needed was the courage to look. That came 3 nights later. He was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand. I had never looked through his phone in 38 years of marriage. I had never wanted to, never felt the need, never had the thought cross my mind as anything other than an invasion of something private. But I stood there in our bedroom, in the room where we had slept side by side for decades, and I picked it up. He hadn't changed the passcode in years. I knew it. Our wedding anniversary, month and year. I opened his messages. I scrolled slowly, my hands not entirely steady. Her name in his phone was listed simply as her first name, Lauren. I knew who Lauren was. She was a colleague of his, a cardiologist 10 years younger, someone I had met at hospital functions a handful of times. Someone I had always found perfectly pleasant, perfectly professional. Someone whose husband I had spoken to at length at the foundation's Christmas party 2 years ago, a quiet, kind man who worked in urban planning and coached his son's soccer team. I read enough. I will not describe what I read, because some things, once you have seen them, live in you permanently, and I see no reason to place them here. What I will tell you is that it had been going on for over a year, that the hotel receipt I had found was not an isolated incident, that there had been other Saturdays, other evenings, other fabricated explanations that I had accepted without hesitation because I had trusted him with the kind of trust that only 38 years can build. I put his phone back exactly where it had been. I went downstairs. I poured myself a glass of water and I stood at the kitchen sink, looking out at the backyard, at the oak tree my daughter used to climb, and I let myself feel what I felt for exactly as long as I needed to feel it. Then I started thinking. I am an art teacher by training. I understand composition. I understand that how you arrange things determines what people see and what they don't. I understood, standing at that sink, that I had a choice about how to arrange what came next. I could fall apart. I could confront him that night, raw and devastated, and watch whatever remained of our shared life collapse in a messy, private implosion. Or I could think clearly. I could compose. I chose to compose. The next morning, after he left for the hospital, I called a friend of mine who had gone through a divorce 7 years earlier. She gave me the name of her attorney. I made an appointment for the following week and told no one. I went to that appointment and I listened carefully, and I began to understand what my options were and what documentation I would need. Over the following weeks, I gathered, quietly, methodically, in the early mornings while he was still sleeping, or in the afternoons while he was at work, bank statements that showed cash withdrawals I had never been aware of. A second email account I found referenced in one of his messages that I eventually got into using a password I knew he used for low-priority accounts. More than enough, more than I wanted. I did not change my behavior toward him. Not once. This is the part that people find difficult to understand, but I need you to understand it, because it matters to what came later. I cooked dinner. I asked about his patients. I sat beside him watching the news in the evenings. I went with him to his nephew's birthday dinner. I smiled at the right moments. I was, to all outward appearances, exactly the wife I had always been. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Inside, I was planning. The Richmond Medical Foundation's annual gala had been on the calendar since October. It was held every February at the Jefferson Hotel downtown, a grand, formal affair that raised money for hospital programs and recognized outstanding contributions from physicians and staff. My husband attended every year. I attended with him most years. This particular year, he was being honored, a special recognition for 3 decades of service. There would be a dinner, a program, and a speech. He told me about it in early December, still not knowing that I knew anything at all. He seemed genuinely pleased. He asked if I would come, said it would mean a lot to him to have me there. I said, of course, I wouldn't miss it. In January, I made a phone call that required more courage than almost anything else I did during those 3 months. I called Lauren's husband. I had his number from a hospital directory that gets mailed to spouses of foundation members each year. I had thought about this call many times, rehearsed it, reconsidered it, lost sleep over it, but he deserved to know. Not just because it was the right thing, though it was, but because I needed him to know before the gala. I needed him to decide for himself what he wanted to do with the information. He answered on the second ring. I introduced myself. I told him I was calling because I believed our spouses had been involved with one another for over a year and that I had documentation if he wanted to see it. There was a long silence on his end of the line. Then he asked me how I had found out. I told him. He was quiet again for a moment, and then he said something that I have not forgotten. He said he had noticed things. He said he had told himself he was imagining it. We talked for a long time. He was measured and careful and clearly fighting to stay steady, and I recognized that steadiness because I had been practicing it for weeks. By the end of the conversation, I had extended him an invitation to the Foundation Gala as my guest. I told him what I was considering doing. He was silent for a long time. Then he said he would be there. I found my table assignment a week before the event. Table arrangements had been emailed to all foundation members. My husband and I were at table 3, near the front, as befitting someone being honored that evening. I made a quiet call to the foundation's event coordinator, a woman I had worked with on a hospital fundraiser years earlier. I told her I had a last-minute guest, a dear family friend, and asked if she could arrange a seat. She was happy to. She put him at table 9. Table 9 was directly in Lauren's sightline from wherever she would be seated with the cardiology department's table, table 6. I bought a new dress. Deep wine, red, long, simple. Not the emerald one my husband had given me. I was not interested in wearing his gifts that night. The evening of the gala was cold and clear. We drove downtown together in his car, and he told me I looked beautiful, and I thanked him, and I looked out the window at the city passing by and felt completely calm in a way that I understood was not peace, but something closer to resolution. The Jefferson Ballroom was full and glittering. Round tables with white linens, candles, the low, warm sound of 200 people in formal wear making conversation. I spotted Lauren's husband near the entrance, standing alone with a glass of water. Our eyes met briefly. I gave a small nod. He nodded back. I found our table. I said hello to the people around us, some of whom I had known for years, physicians and their spouses, board members, longtime foundation donors. I was gracious. I laughed at the right moments. I ate my salad. I listened to the opening remarks from the foundation chair. My husband was called to the stage during the recognition portion of the program, between the main course and dessert. He was comfortable up there. He had given speeches before, accepted awards before, stood at podiums, and known what to do with his hands and his voice. He thanked the foundation board. He thanked his colleagues. He talked about what medicine meant to him, about the privilege of the work, about the patients who had changed his understanding of what it meant to be in service to another person's life. And then he paused. The way speakers do when they are about to say something they consider especially meaningful, and he looked directly at me, at our table, and he said that none of it would have been possible without his anchor, his steady, constant anchor of 38 years, sitting right there at table 3. He said I was the foundation beneath the foundation. He raised his glass. 200 people turned to look at me and smiled and raised their glasses, and I felt the room hold its breath for just a moment, that warm, collective pause of a crowd moved by something they recognize as genuine. I stood up. This was not in the program. This was not expected. My husband looked at me with a slightly puzzled smile, the way you look at someone who is doing something charming and unexpected. I picked up my own glass. I spoke clearly and not too loudly, but the room was quiet enough that I was heard at every table. I said that I wanted to thank him for those words, that I had been his anchor for 38 years, and I had taken that role seriously in ways he would perhaps only now begin to understand. I said that anchors, by their nature, hold things in place while the boat goes wherever it wants to go, And then I said that I also wanted to acknowledge another kind of support in the room this evening, the kind he had been relying on for the past 14 months, and that if everyone would direct their attention to table 6, they might recognize his colleague, Dr. Lauren, who had provided that support so generously with, I was delighted to say, her own husband present this evening at table 9. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was not silent anymore. I did not look at my husband's face after the first moment. I had seen what I needed to see. I looked at the room instead, the confusion, the dawning recognition, the heads turning between table 6 and table 9, the particular stillness that falls over a crowd when they understand that they have just witnessed something real and irreversible. Lauren's husband was already standing. His expression was not what I had expected. It was not rage, exactly. It was something more like a man who has just had the word confirmed for something he feared was true and had hoped was not. He set his glass down on the table very carefully, and he walked toward table 6, and the room watched him go. I picked up my evening bag. I looked at the foundation chair, who was standing at the side of the stage with his mouth slightly open, and I thanked him for a lovely evening. I walked to the exit with my back straight and my heels quiet on the marble floor, and I did not look back. My daughter called me at 11:30 that night. She had already gotten 3 texts from people who had been there. She was crying, partly from shock and partly from something else, something she couldn't quite name yet, and she asked me why I hadn't told her what was happening. I told her that I had needed to be sure before I involved her. I told her that her father was still her father, that whatever he had done to me was not a reflection of his love for her, and that I hoped she would find her way to that understanding, even if it took time. She cried for a while longer. I let her. Then I told her I was fine, that I was genuinely fine, and that I would talk to her more in the morning. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen in the quiet house and I thought about 38 years. I thought about all of it. The good parts, which were real, they were real, and I would not allow what came after to erase them entirely. The toothache waiting room. The first apartment we shared that had a radiator that banged so loudly in winter that we slept with earplugs. The night my daughter was born, and he stood in the hallway outside the delivery room and cried in a way I had never seen him cry before or since. The trip to Portugal for our 25th anniversary, walking along the waterfront in the evening heat, all of it real, all of it ours. And then the other thing, also real. My husband came home at 2 in the morning. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at me sitting at the table, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. He said my name. I said that my attorney had sent his attorney a letter that morning, and that he would be receiving the relevant documentation within the week, and that I expected him to begin making arrangements to stay elsewhere, beginning that weekend. I said it the way you say something you have practiced until it no longer has the power to undo you. He started to say something. I don't remember what. I told him that I was going to bed, and that I would appreciate it if he slept in the guest room, and that we would conduct the rest of this process through our respective legal representatives. I stood up from the table. I walked past him in the doorway. I would like to tell you that I did not feel anything in that moment, but I did. I felt the full weight of it. The grief of a life turning on an axis, the particular sadness of ending something that had once been everything. I felt it all. I just kept walking. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. We divided what we had built together across 38 years, which was, in the end, a manageable process because I had a very good attorney and documentation that left little room for argument. He kept the house. I had not wanted it. I moved to a smaller place, a condo with tall windows and good afternoon light on the north side of the city near the park where I had walked for years. Lauren's husband filed for divorce as well, I learned through channels that were not quite gossip, but not quite not. I heard later that the relationship between my husband and his colleague did not survive the public circumstances of its exposure, which surprised me less than it might have once. Some things only exist in shadow. Pull them into the light, and they don't know what to do with themselves. I do not know what my husband's life looks like now in any detail, and I find I do not need to. I know he is still practicing medicine. I know he still lives in Richmond. Those are the facts that were relevant to the legal process. Beyond that, his life is his own. Mine has become something I did not entirely anticipate. I went back to painting seriously for the first time in years, not the careful, small watercolors I had been doing in my studio, but larger work, oil on canvas, the kind of work that requires you to commit. I joined a studio cooperative downtown with other artists who rent shared space, and I go there 4 mornings a week, and those mornings have become the hours I feel most fully like myself. I also went back to the children's hospital, to the art therapy program I had started years earlier. I run 2 sessions a week now instead of 1. The children in those sessions are dealing with things that make everything else, everything I went through, everything I thought was so enormous, look very small. They remind me what courage actually requires. A 7-year-old teaching herself to draw with her non-dominant hand because her dominant arm is in a cast from surgery, focused and unbothered and entirely without self-pity, teaches you more about resilience than anything I could write down here. Last spring, my daughter brought my grandchildren to visit for 2 weeks. On the second day, my oldest grandchild, who is 9, asked me if I wanted to go to the park. We walked there in the late afternoon, and she ran ahead on the path the way children do, and I watched her go, and I felt something I can only describe as uncomplicated, just clean, uncomplicated gladness. I had been dignified for 38 years while being faithful to a man who was not faithful to me. I had anchored him, the way he said, held things steady while he went wherever he wanted. There is no version of that in which I was wrong to have been who I was. My faithfulness was mine. His choices were his. These are separate things, and I hold them separately. What I did at the Jefferson Hotel that February evening was not something I am ashamed of. It was not something I would undo. I had been quiet for long enough. I had held things in their place for long enough. That night, I simply declined to do it anymore, and I declined in a room full of people who had watched me do it graciously for decades, because I wanted them to know what grace had cost and what it had covered. The best outcome of a difficult thing is not revenge. It is not even justice, exactly, though I believe something just occurred. The best outcome is what I have right now, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Tall windows with good light, a canvas that is about 2/3 finished and going somewhere interesting, a cup of tea on the work table beside me, and the quiet, settled knowledge that I know exactly who I am. I always did. I just had to clear some space to remember it. If you are watching this and you recognize something in what I have described, not necessarily the details, but the shape of it, the particular loneliness of knowing something you haven't yet allowed yourself to fully know, I want you to hear this. The steadiness you have been giving to someone else is yours. It belongs to you. You can redirect it. Thank you for watching. If this story reached you, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if there is someone in your life who needs to hear this, share it with them. We will see you in the next one.